Today's video is one that I've been thinking about for a few weeks now. In fact, there were two nights where I woke up in the middle of the night with really clear downloads. And so today I just thought I have to film this. I need to get a good night's sleep. So here we are. Welcome to the 5 A's of enrollment. And the focus of this video is really more business oriented. So for service-based businesses, coaches, practitioners, healers. And I would offer the 5 A's themselves are much more, they're bigger than that. It's really like a framework for living your life. The 5 A's really apply to every area and every relationship. So if you're seeing this and you don't have your own business, I invite you to take the messaging and apply it to an area that feels resonant for you. See how that fits. As always with my videos, it's very unpolished. It's very what's present is what gets delivered. That's just how I roll. I am sharing my experience. Your experience is very different from my experience. And so the invitation is to receive and apply and take in what feels aligned and let go of what doesn't. And you can also be curious about both. I am Amber Chris, by the way. If you do not know who I am a coach and a spiritual mentor guide. I really, there's been an evolution, I would say, in my work, which I'm going to talk about in this video. And I consider myself someone who helps people live more authentically, live more free, feel more connected to the truth of who they are and outside of the conditions of who they thought they should be. Okay, so we're going to get into this video, the 5 A's of enrollment. This is like, I would say like it's a broad picture, which I think can be really helpful because sometimes when we get into the world of business, it can get very step heavy and structure heavy. And so this has room for it all, which you'll see. So let's talk about what the 5 A's are. The first A is attunement. And that you'll see like a circle here. So to me, these two A's are really the container that hold these in here. And so attunement is the first A. And to me, attunement is listening. It's listening beyond thought. It's listening for your guidance, your wisdom. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. Let me give you the second A. So the second A is down here, and I consider it availability. Another way to think of availability is openness, receptivity. So if you're thinking about this idea of listening, the more open and receptive you are, the easier it is to hear and receive the inspiration or the guidance. So I believe that all of us are a part of nature. We're all made of the same stuff. And we have a connection to source energy. You could call that spirit. You could call that intuition. There's so many different names for it. But to me, we're actually connected to the same energy that causes an acorn to become an oak tree, right? Like a sperm and an egg to form an actual human. Like this, there's just magic and mystery, and we are connected to that line of intelligence. And so when our nervous system, and here I'm talking about the autonomic nervous system, it's like the surveillance system that's constantly monitoring your environment for safety. It's like, is there a threat? And so when our nervous system is regulated, when we feel open and engaged and settled inside of ourselves, it's so much easier to receive the guidance, right? We're so much more available. And so I'm going to go over here to use this for a second. I think of this like you can think of it like a cable. This is a thing I'm playing with right now, which is, you know how when you are hardwired to the internet, when you're hardwired to the internet, it's so much more stable. It's consistent. It's less disruptive, right? There's like less noise on the channel, less interruptions of it dropping out. To me, that is our connection to source when our system is regulated. So what we're going for is, right, when our system is regulated, there's this just like clear open channel. Here we are in my artistry, my great artistry, but it's like here we are, and it's just this open, attuned, available receiver. And so we can feel and hear insights, guidance, next steps. When our systems are more dysregulated, so that means it could be busy thoughts, it could be lower tone feelings, it could be, right, like a tight, constricted nervous system, or completely foggy and confused. When we're more in that type of state, it's like we are on Wi-Fi, right? We're connected wirelessly to the internet, and so it's less consistent. It can drop out more. I know for me, I live in an area where there's a lot of wind. We get windstorms, and when there are big windstorms, that impacts the way our Wi-Fi works. To me, that's the same over here. When we're in that dysregulated state, that impacts our ability to listen, to like hear clearly and receive clearly. So that's like the channel gets a little bit more clogged, right? It's like information might want to come in, but instead of having a straight shot, it's hitting and bouncing off before it can sort of get to us. Now, it would be easy in this scenario to think your job is to be regulated all the time. No, that's actually not the case. Um, we as humans, I like to think of it as this is called the human experience. And part of the human experience is having dysregulation, is experiencing the lower tone feelings, experiencing our minds stirred up. Right. There's no better or worse to me when we are dysregulated, there is information, and that information can actually be really helpful if we turn towards, right, if we feel safe enough to turn towards the experience as it's happening. Usually when we do that, that can help us drop in to that more regulated place where we can hear and see more clearly. Okay, so that is my teaching in a way around this idea of attunement and availability. And here's the interesting thing is we don't always know when we're dysregulated. And so sometimes we'll take action on something that we think is through inspiration, and then after we start implementing it, it becomes more clear that this was from a should. Which, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going and talk about the next A's. And so attunement and availability are really the container, and the more open we are, the more we can receive the breadcrumbs that show us the next step and the next step and the next step. And by the way, that applies to our business. Okay, so the next A is inside the circle is alignment. And alignment to me, I'm blanking in this moment, I'm going to look. So alignment to me is sort of what I was just talking about. Is it coming from intellect? Is it coming from intuition? Is it coming from a should? Is it coming from a want? Is it coming from the ego? Is it coming from our higher selves? And sometimes we don't know, and that's totally fine. Sometimes it feels like this is completely aligned, and it is. And sometimes it feels this is completely aligned, and it isn't. And all of these are just and valuable, especially if we receive the information and take the learning to apply. So when we're in alignment with something, this is the action that I think represents that. It's like we could have scattered energy, we could have scattered thinking, we could have lots of creative ideas when it comes to enrollment, but alignment is really, it's like everything comes together and it's clear. You could think of a hose, right? It's like a hose that's spraying versus meaning like everywhere versus a hose that's a stream, really clear in the direction. That to me is about alignment. The next A is authenticity. And so authenticity to me here is where we start to press into conditioning. For me, I am my part of my coping strategy was really I had a rigidity that I used to really practice, and I believe there was a right way and a wrong way, and the right way kept me safe. And so authenticity, I wouldn't tune in necessarily to what felt good to me, or I wouldn't give myself permission to do what felt good for me because I would follow the rules, right? That overrode this idea of being authentic, right? Because there was conditioning on top of this more free place where I could receive and respond and follow through with the ideas that I innately had. Is there anything else I want to say? Yes. So there can be, authenticity can also be more of like a controlling pattern versus a flowing pattern. And this all, it has to do with conditioning. And sometimes we see our conditioning and sometimes don't. We're going to get to that in a moment too. All right. So the last A is action. Because the truth of the matter is, no matter what you want to do, if it's enrollment in your business, if it's a creative project in another area of your life, if it's dating, if it's having kids, right? It's like action is required to produce fruitful results in the world. And this really is the framework that can support you in taking the most aligned action. That listening, how available am I to receive it? Is it aligned, right? As the idea lands, like for example, I'll give an example for business. So for coaches, let's say an idea of, someone comes to mind that you want to invite into a conversation about a program that you're going to be leading. So that person comes to mind, you've received it, right? You were open, you received it. Then it's like, is it aligned to reach out to them? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. A lot of times we won't necessarily slow down to attune to that. For example, if you haven't talked to someone in 10 years, it would probably be very strange for you to pop up out of the blue and invite them to your offering, right? But sometimes we override that because we're like in a construct of like fill the group, right? So that action, it's got to come through. Is it aligned? And then what's the most authentic way, right? Let's say yes, it's a clear yes to reach out to the person. Well, what's the most authentic way? What feels good to me? Is it an email? Is it an audio message? Is it a video message? Is it let's see, I want to go to coffee first, or maybe we go on a walk and talk, or right? It's like there's lots of different possibilities that come through your own expression that will support you in getting clear about the action that you're taking. Okay, so that was a lot to take in. I hope that made sense. If not, you can always comment. This will help to clarify it, I hope. And so the other piece in this, you'll see here LOC. I'm not going to write it, but LOC stands for your level of consciousness. Your level of consciousness. And so what do I mean by that? To me, your level of consciousness is really sometimes the mind can hear this as a better or less, and that's not accurate. Your level of consciousness is really how well you know who you really are. So experientially, how well, how do I want to say it? It's like understanding where the human experience comes from, understanding the nature of thought, the nature of feelings, the nature of the nervous system. Because all of those, when we start to really get into those, they point us towards us, a place inside of us that is permanent, that doesn't change. That's the way I would describe it. So, level of consciousness is how familiar are you with that permanent you, the you that has been you from the moment you were born, right? Because thought changes all the time, body experience change all the time, feelings change all the time. And yet, there is, if you think of who you were at 5, if you think you were who you were at 25, if you think who you were at 45, there is this thread of me. Even though the body changes, even though location changes, even though all these other things change, there's still the self. And to me, the more you're familiar and living inside of that, that is a deepening in your level of consciousness. And when we have that deepening in the level of consciousness, it's much easier to see the conditioning that has been running. And so, what do I mean by all of this? Let me ground this in real time. And I'm going to use my work and my business as an example. So, for a long time in my coaching practice, I would say my level of consciousness was at the level that was really focused on improvement. And I have no shame in this. Like this is the journey. This is the evolution of humans. And what I'm talking about here is when we start to wake up to who we really are beyond who we think we are, beyond the survival patterns and conditioning that we've lived as true in our lives. And so when I was first working in my business, what I mean by the consciousness level of improvement is, and this was all unknown. I was unaware. That's often something that I think is really important. I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of the conditioning, the improvement pattern that was running. It was just, I was running it. I was in it. And so the improvement pattern, how that would look is, it's like I didn't want to feel anxiety. I didn't want to feel inadequate. I didn't want to feel like a failure. And again, this was not all conscious. It wasn't in my awareness. And so I was just constantly in the pursuit of improvement, right? If I have this much money in my bank account, if I weigh this much on the scale, if I improve this skill set, then I won't feel this insecure, this feeling that feels uncomfortable that I don't like. So I just kept on really using my mind, my thinking, to support me in this game of like running to a finish line that promised, uh, right, like promised an arrival, and then the arrival never came because inevitably I'd hit the goal and then the line would reset, and so I'd try to go for the next goal and the next goal. So that's sort of the consciousness level that I was at, and so I would consider that very high achieving, right? Like I'm on the path of more. Again, nothing wrong with this. And so that time in my work, the actions that I was taking, right, they were very aligned. They were very authentic. They were very attuned for that level of consciousness. And then what happened a couple of years ago is this same model that I had been using, the same actions that I had been taking, were producing different results. Not just financially, but it's like clients were more upset with me. There were just these strange dynamics, right? That I could not for the life of me wrap my mind around. And so what was happening was I was following the actions that I was used to taking, but the feedback from those actions wasn't lining up. And it was very disorienting for a period of time. It was very confusing for a period of time. It wasn't within my control. And so really what was happening was I was shifting into a different level of consciousness, but I didn't know that that's what was happening. And so as I supported myself through that process, right? I started working with a coach. I started allowing myself to have more rest. Life sort of gracefully removed. It was like I was changing frequency, and the people that didn't have that same frequency sort of dispersed. And so I ended up having a bit more space to allow myself to drop in. And then that's when I started to notice all this conditioning that had been running around safety and being likable and being pleasing and money equals safety, right? There were like all these misunderstandings that started to show up that I had no idea were running. That's really what I was running from in the improvement level, but I just didn't know that. And then suddenly life came in and was like, hey, you are ready to move to the next level of consciousness. And, thankfully, I didn't go kicking and screaming. I was so confused and just so sort of like desperate for support. And so now where I am is it's like the actions that I take in my business. This is where I don't think I mentioned this. I shared an article recently where I talked about a top down approach to enrollment, a bottom up approach to enrollment. I'll include the link if you haven't read that. To me, when I was in that high achieving, improve, right? Like one day you'll arrive and you'll feel good. It was almost like feeling good all the time was the goal there. And that the way in which that I worked with people was I would have multiple complimentary sessions with them when they were new to me before I even talked about working together. And that made sense. That was aligned. I was working with people more on like a strategic skill, teaching a skill set level. And so it's like the mind, I was really speaking to the mind. That's how I describe it now. I did not know that at the time. But I was speaking to the mind. The person's mind would become aware of something that they didn't know before. They would sort of see a gap in their skill set, a gap in their understanding, right? And so then the work would be about helping them build that skill. And so it's like the mind would decide. The mind would say, oh, yes, I see very clearly what this is. This is a logical reason to sign up for this. I'm in, right? That tended to be that model. Where I am now, what I would say is this work it's deeper because we're really working on coping strategies, survival strategies, bringing what has been unconscious into light so that it can be integrated and let go, right? We're talking about like expanding safety within the system. So in essence, what that looks like is turning towards the feelings and the experiences that we've been running from. And that's not right for everyone, first of all. And so now my enrollment has changed to more of a bottom up approach. And what I mean by that is instead of doing, 2 or 3 or 4 complimentary sessions, I do more of a one intake session. And I don't fully get into the work with the person because working in this way, there is a different type of vulnerability and people can really open up. And so staying in attunement to what feels aligned right now, it's like that old path that I was working needed a reframe. And I can tell you that since, gosh, I hope that this is a helpful video. But I can tell you that since sort of moving through that shift in consciousness and working with people differently, and I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that and how that looks, what has happened, like it's very clear that, it's like alignment got off. When I was in that improvement model, taking those actions, life was pointing me towards growing. And so alignment was off. I was taking actions that weren't yet aligned, right? Because I was moving out of the improvement model and I hadn't really stepped into the turn towards what feels uncomfortable model. And so now that is much more aligned. And what I'm finding is I have more energy. People are coming towards me with a lot more ease. I'm getting more ideas around ways to share this work. And so this framework still very much applies. It applied over here at the improvement path, and it applies over here in this other way of working. I'm just going to check my notes to see if there's anything else that I want to share. Oh, yeah. So this is also why you'll notice, and this could have happened to you, right? It certainly happened to me when I first started my business. I moved towards the online approach, which was very much, lots of social media, lots of blogs. You open a cart, you do 3 or 4 training videos, you open the cart, it's open for 2 weeks, and then you close the cart and boom, you have this filled program. Like I thought that was the way. And that approach just it didn't work for me. It didn't open for me. And I followed the steps, but there was something about it that wasn't really aligned. And so that's when I started to learn more about the prosperous coach approach. And then I started to implement that. And that opened doors. That was really aligned. And now I would say I'm probably a mix of many different things because I'm following the directive of that attunement. And so what I mean, why I'm saying all of this is sometimes you'll be following a strategy and like steps perfectly, and your result won't produce. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the steps incorrectly. It could mean that. It could be like an improvement of skill set, but it could also be that that approach isn't aligned for where you are in your level of consciousness, or how like life wants to use you in expressing your gifts and talents and creations in the world. So I'll give an example of, because I think it's helpful, same situation and how I might have worked with it differently in these two areas. So let's say someone came to me recently and was talking about just how inundated they are with their email inbox and how that really gets to set how relaxed their nervous system is, or how like flooded and overwhelmed their nervous system is. And I have some familiarity with that. I used to be like, inbox zero is the goal. When I have zero emails, I can relax. And how often do you have zero in emails? Really, it's like, how often are you, I just feel like there's always laundry to do. There's always dishes to wash, because that's just the way it goes. And so it's the same with emails. So in the past, and this isn't, I'm just sharing this to give an example of what I mean by like level of consciousness, because I think it can be helpful. So when I was working more on that like surface level, and I would even do some inner work, but not to the depth that I'm doing it now. Right. So the person comes in and says, wow, I very rarely, like, I don't really ever take time off of my emails. Even on the weekends, I go in for a couple of hours because I just don't want to have, 300 emails waiting for me on Monday. So in the past, I would have likely, talked a little bit about, right, how inner experience isn't based or dictated on outer reality, right? It's like there's something in the system that wants to be seen. I probably would have done that. And I would have talked about how relaxation isn't linked to the emails. I might have even taught some skills. Like, I'm a graduate of the University of Santa Monica. I might have even taught, like, done some self-forgiveness, which is beautiful. There's like, that skill is amazing. It has a clear place, no question. And I see now that approach was more around like, do this so you can achieve something. And the model that I'm in now is like, it's not about achieving anything. It's almost like settling into so you can see what's here and then let that be revealed. And so in the past, I also would have worked with like practical things like, can you set an alarm for 30 minutes and then at 30 minutes get up and go for a walk, or put a song on and dance and shake it up a little bit and then come back, versus like powering through as quickly as possible so that I can feel settled. Or maybe it would have been, can you block off, X amount of time on the calendar each day that is admin time, and then let yourself rest. Like, we could have done it at a more practical level. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with practical level. Like, I still do practical level with people. And what I didn't see then, that I see so clearly now, is it's like when the person sat down and saw all the emails in their inbox, they were flooded with a feeling. And it's like all action was about, how do I get rid of this feeling? And so in a way, that's the work that I was doing with them, was like, let's get rid of this thing. Versus now, I'm like, hey, there's actually information there. Can we slow down with what's arising? Can we feel what's here? And for me, and I'm only talking about myself, when I was working with this pattern inside of myself, as I started to sit with the tightness that was coming up in my system, what really showed up was, like, I'm a bad person if I don't respond. People are waiting for me. I'm going to let them down, right? There was all of these sort of misunderstandings that were linked to being good, having value, having worth, that were hiding out, that I didn't, it was like, right, noise on the channel that I wasn't aware of until it was time for me to be aware of it. And so what started to become, what started to show itself was first anxiety, right? I started to see the anxiety of like, I've got to get back to them as quickly as possible. And urgency would really kick up. And then when I started to meet that, I saw what was underneath that, right? It's almost like the urgency and the anxiety were trying to protect me from feeling the deeper pain of shame, right? I'm bad. That's what was really underneath that patterning. And as I started to work with and let out some of those feelings, I got much more free in, like, the emails can be as many as they want, right? I can feel that my safety isn't linked to that. My, like, psychological safety isn't linked to that. My likability isn't linked to that. My leadership, good leadership, isn't linked to that, right? Like, I started to be able to have more separation and live more free. This is what I mean by I help people live more free, right? I think that's a good example of how, right, conditioning shows up, and we want it to, right? Like that conditioning of improvement, that was how my system was trying to take care of me. And that's why we can't force ourselves to bring conditioning, like to bring it into consciousness. We can't do that. We can support ourselves in creating an environment inside of ourselves that will help us receive and say yes when it's time for those things to be revealed. um yeah, so having said that, like, you can start to see how that version of enrollment where I was doing 3 conversations with people, if we started to get into the land of feeling shame and then I'm like, bye, that that could produce more harm than good, right? So that's why the anatomy for me of enrollment needed to change. Is there anything else that I want to say? I don't think so. So you can take these 5 A's and start to play with them, start to practice with them in your work and in your life. Um, you know, because this applies to, like, boundaries, this applies to social settings, this applies to permission to rest, this applies to so many areas. And this was a big conversation. This was a lot to take in. If you have questions, you can certainly put them in the comments underneath this video. If you have comments, you can put it in the comments. If you want to reach out to me, my email is hello@amberchris.com. I'll also put that in the comments below. I hope this framework of attunement, availability, alignment, authenticity, action, it's almost like those 4 steps happen before you take action. And they don't have to, you don't have to spend hours and days or things like that. Like, sometimes it's just like a clear knowing and you go. Other times that's not so much. And life will give you feedback, right? Like, life gave me very clear feedback about how this framework that I was using, I needed to move. I needed to shift it. I needed to move beyond that. I needed to create something different. And so in your work, it's like, instead of following the rules that say, right, you should be on social media and post at least 2 times a day. But if you're feeling inside that doesn't feel good, right there, I will also say this. Let me say this one more. When you're first learning a skill, it's probably not going to feel good. That's a really important distinction, right? It's like you're learning something that you didn't know before. Usually, when we're learning something we've never done before, we're pretty bad at it. That's not always the case. And so giving yourself time to practice the skills so that you feel more confident in it. I feel like that's a little bit different than, like, a knowing that sharing 2 days on social media, that's just not who you are, right? That wasn't who I was. Or, right, like, there are approaches or styles out there that tell you to create a podcast. Well, if you don't want to, if that feels like a lot of work or doesn't feel good to you, then don't force yourself to do that. Or, there are writing an email or having a newsletter or having a video channel, right? There can be all of these things out there, or even personal invites. I will say personal invites and having conversations with people, right? That's the way to, that's what we're doing. I don't care what type of business, even like the bigger businesses that you see out there, like bigger coaches, they have sales teams. And that means people are having conversations with someone before they're signing up for the program. And so conversations to me are important. But the conversation itself can look different, right? Based on where you are in your business, how long you've been in business, what feels aligned, like all of those things. All right. I'm tangenting. I'm not going to do that. All right. If you have questions, you can let me know. I hope this was helpful. And I'm just wishing you so much play as you explore attunement, availability, alignment, authenticity, and action. Okay. Bye.